Hi everybody, this is Laura, CityScrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for the April Crazy Craft Obsession Rainbow Magic Hop. And this month, the color that we are working with is pink. 49 and Market is one of my favorite manufacturers, and I love their collection called Vintage Artistry Blush. And it's a collection that has mostly pink. It has a number of touches of green as well, but I didn't use any of those. I stuck to just the pink embellishments and papers. I'm starting off this layout with a piece of white cardstock. This is a 120-pound smooth white cardstock, and I coated it with some Liquitex white gesso. Now I'm adding some sprays to the background using my favorite packaging technique. I used 3 different sprays on this layout. I started off with a Nuvo Mica Mist, and the color for that one is Pink Carnation. The sprayer didn't work on this spray, so I just poured a little bit onto the plastic, and now I'm moving that color around the page. And I like this color. I thought it was a good first layer of color, but I wanted the color to be a little bit more noticeable. So then I started using the color called Oriental Fuschia, and that's also a Nuvo Mica Mist. And for some reason, the spray didn't work on this one either. I got a little bit of color out the first time, and then after that, I had to just open up the bottle and use the spray without the sprayer. At the very beginning of the video, you might have seen I had a number of elements I'm going to put on the left-hand side of the layout, and then I drew a pencil line around those just so I would have an idea where to put the color. And as I was applying the color, I just decided on the spot that I was going to also add an area of color on the right-hand side too. I really like the Oriental Fuchsia. I thought it was a nice bright pink, and I wanted there to be some touches of a brighter color in the background. And then I also used a Lindy's Starburst spray in Cotton Candy Pink. I like the way adding a number of different shades of pink, some lighter, some brighter, to the background makes it look, I think, a little bit more interesting. And I also added a whole bunch of splatters. I continued adding layers of color using the plastic. Then I would dry those layers, and then I would add some splatters. I dried the splatters, and then I just kept repeating that, building up layers of color until I was happy with the way the background looked. And I thought that the area on the top looked like it didn't have as much color as the other areas, so right now I'm trying to build that area up. I wanted it to look similar to the other areas on the layout. And then I keep drying the background as well with my heat tool. Now this can sometimes cause the paper to warp a little bit, and what I do is I wait for the whole background to dry, and then I will run it through my laminator, sometimes more than once, and that helps the paper to flatten out a little bit. And I learned that a long time ago from watching Paige Evans videos. I'm using a paper towel, and I'm cleaning up a couple of areas in the background, something I'm able to do because there's gesso in the background. And now I'm adding some droplets of water, and I'm going to lift those droplets of water up with a paper towel, and that causes kind of a cool effect. And sometimes it causes a very clear effect, and other times it's more subtle. And on this layout, I don't think it was super noticeable, but I do like to try it every time because I love the look that that can give to a background. And here you could see that I'm adding more splatters. I wanted there to be even more of that brighter pink color. Now I'm adding some stamping to the background. I started off with this stamp. It's from Technique Junkies, and the stamp is called Paint Rings. I really like this stamp. I like the way there are a lot of different size overlapping circles. I bought this at a scrapbooking convention a while back, and the people at the Technique Junkies booth were just so unbelievably nice. There are so many nice people at scrapbooking shows, but I just thought these people were just the standouts. They were so super sweet. Next, I used a script stamp. I love this stamp. I purchased this at a flea market, and I use it all the time on my layouts. I think that it adds a really nice touch to most backgrounds. And then this is one of my new favorites. This is a Tim Holtz stamp. It was from one of those sets that has stamps and stencils. Many of the stamps in this set had images of mushrooms, but then there were a couple of other stamps that I was absolutely in love with. This was the main reason why I purchased this set, but there was also a little script stamp mixed in there as well, but I haven't given that one a try just yet. The ink that I'm using is called Staz On in Jet Black, and I think that Staz On is perfect for mixed media backgrounds, just in case I want to go back in and add some other paints or other sprays. I don't have to worry about the color running. And you can see here I am going back in once again with some more bright pink splatters. And I add a lot of splatters to this layout. I just really like the way those touches of bright pink looked on the background. In March, I took a month off from all of my hops. I just needed a little bit of time to rest my brain and re-energize a little bit. And I missed the color red, which was the March color for this Rainbow Magic hop. And I'm sorry that I missed the red. I really like creating with red. I used a wet paper towel and I cleaned up a few areas at the top and the bottom of the layout. And now I'm going in with a few more splatters. I don't want the edge to look unnatural where I've cleaned up the color, so I like to go in with a few more splatters to kind of make the edge look a little irregular. And then I was thinking that I wanted to add just a tiny bit of gesso to the top and the bottom. There were just too many splatters that I thought were strays, and I wanted to clean up the area a little bit. So I'm using some Liquitex, just the regular gesso. I didn't use the heavy gesso. The heavy gesso that I have is actually a slightly different color than the Liquitex gesso, so I try not to mix those two together. Unfortunately, my camera did not record it, but I did add some modeling paste through a stencil to the background. I used some Liquitex modeling paste, and then I used a stencil that I love from the Crafters Workshop. It's called Mini Tile Mania, and I love the way that one creates lines on the background. And then I also added some white splatters to the background as well, and that was done with some watered down white acrylic paint. Now I'm taking those elements that I had chosen for the background and I'm inking them up with some Distress ink in black soot. Because there's a lot of black stamping on the background, I wanted to ink the edges so that the pattern paper and the embellishments and the background would all go together. Here I'm using a 4-inch strip of paper from the 49 and Market collection. I had to cut the white background paper down a little bit because the pattern paper was a little bit shorter than the paper. And now I'm using a number of journaling cards and ephemera pieces, and I'm layering them behind the photo. The photo that I'm using measures 3.5 by 5.5 inches. I have it mounted on some thick white cardstock, and I just play around with the layers until I like the way they're arranged behind the photo. I have some tickets that are from the ephemera pack for this collection, and I placed 2 of them at the top of the cluster. I found a scrap of paper that had a very small diagonal stripe on it. Thought that would look nice to the left of the photo. There was also an ephemera piece that had a bit of a doily on it, so I layered that into the cluster as well. Now I am going to mount my photo on some of this beautiful pink paper. This is another one of the pattern papers from the collection. I inked the edges with the Distress ink, and then I mounted my photo on top of that piece of pattern paper, and now I'm just going to attach it right down to the cluster. On the right-hand side of the cluster, you could see that there's a circle, or at least part of a circle, and that is a Viewmaster disc, I believe it's called, and I couldn't wait to use that piece of ephemera. I just absolutely love that shape. I don't, however, end up using it on this layout, even though it was something that I was kind of looking forward to using from the very start. Sometimes you just have to make those hard decisions and edit some things out. But before I remove that, I put some more pieces of ephemera behind the photo, and in some cases I just cut off the pieces that I know won't show. I know there's a strong likelihood that if I save those pieces I'll use them on another layout, and so I don't want to waste them by having them behind a photo where you won't be able to see them. I wanted to back the openings in the disc, so I decided to use a very light colored pink paper. I already had part of a circle cut out, and then I used another strip of paper that I found that I had, and I attached 2 small rectangles down to 2 of the openings that I knew would be visible, and then I cut that piece of ephemera in half because I didn't want to waste half of it behind the cluster, but then I decided that it was just covering up too much of the mixed media and it really didn't add what I thought it would add to the layout, so I decided I would take it off of the layout. But I didn't do that till the next day. When I woke up, I looked at the layout and I thought, this really doesn't need to be here. I moved the doily ephemera piece that's on the left-hand side of the cluster up a little bit. And then because I had removed that whole half circle from the right-hand side of the photo cluster, I decided to add a little something on the right, and I decided on a little strip of the paper that I already have on the left-hand side of the background. In comparing the area of color on the right to the area of color on the left, I felt that I had a lot more stamping on the right than on the left, so I definitely wanted to add some more of the circle stamps to the area on the left, and then I also went back in with that dot stamp and I added more on the left, but I also added some more stamping on the right as well. And then I don't know why I didn't do this sooner, but I looked at the photo and I was thinking I really, really want to pop that up on some foam. So I neatly and carefully pulled up the photo from the pink mat. I pried it up a little from each edge, and that way I knew that I wouldn't rip the pattern paper along the edge. If there was any ripping, I knew it would be in the center, and I wasn't worried about that because that gets covered up by the photo. I have found that if I just take the photo from one side and then pull it up, it can sometimes rip the paper on the opposite edge from where I pulled it, and I definitely don't want to have to cut that paper out again and waste $49 in market paper, so I try to be careful not to rip the paper that it's mounted on. And you could see that I have a lot of experience with ripping up papers because I do tend to change my mind quite a bit. But I did successfully pull up that photo, put some foam behind it, and now it just has a little bit of dimension. I had a few smaller butterflies. I wanted butterflies that were a little bit larger, and I found that there were two that I could fussy cut out of that same paper that I used to make the striped background on the left-hand side of the layout. So I fussy cut those two out. I inked the edges of both of them with the black soot distress ink. I'm going to have one of the butterflies on the area of color on the right and then the other one on the area of color on the left, and I did want to pop those up on a little bit of foam, so I cut some thin strips of fun foam. I put them on the wings, put some adhesive on the wings and the center of the butterfly, and then press down on the center of the butterfly, and that makes the wings pop up. I also put some dimensional flowers right on those butterflies. That's something that I've never done before, and I think they look kind of cute. I also added some dimensional flowers to the photo cluster. I have a bright and a lighter pink flower on the upper left-hand corner and then also on the lower right-hand corner. And then I use some heavy matte gel medium to attach those flowers down to the layout. And then I also used it to attach the flowers down to the centers of the butterflies. I add a couple more smaller butterflies, one to each of those little mini flower clusters. There's a slightly larger butterfly at the top of the layout and then a smaller one in the other flower cluster. I realized I didn't really like the way those flowers were sitting on the layout, so I used some little scraps of fun foam and placed them behind the flowers just to raise them up a little bit so they would sit correctly on the photo. And I believe that in most cases I put 2 layers of the foam behind the flowers, and that did the trick. So I want to call my layout Brooklyn. I am using some Sizzix letter dies, and I love the way these letter dies are all attached together. I know some people would rather have the individual letter dies, but I like when they're all attached and I can see exactly where all the letters are. So I cut out the word Brooklyn 4 times, 3 times out of white cardstock and then once out of pink pattern paper. Then I used gel glue and I attached all the layers together, of course with the pattern paper on the top. I waited for them to dry, and now I'm inking the letters with some Distress Oxide in Picked Raspberry, and this makes them look a little bit brighter, I thought. But then I also wanted the letters to tie in with everything else on the layout, so I'm just slightly inking the edges with some of the black soot distress ink. Now at first I was thinking that I would put my title at the bottom of the page, so I arranged it down at the bottom, and then I want to add a sentiment that says good times, and this was cut from one of the branding strips. To make the sentiment stand out a little bit, I cut a mat to go behind it out of pink paper, and I used a little bit of the picked raspberry distress oxide to add a little bit more color to that mat, and then I attached the sentiment down on top of it. I moved all of the letters to the top of the page. That's where my title ends up. And I also layered a butterfly behind the letters. And I usually attach all of the letters down to the layout off camera just because it takes me so long to line everything up. I wanted to include some photo corners. I tried 2 different pattern papers. One was solid pink and one was a stripe, and I decided that I like the solid pink photo corner. I used my EK Success scalloped photo corner punch to punch out those photo corners. I attached my title down, and now I'm using some Finnabair heavy gesso and an old bristle brush, and I'm dabbing a little bit of the white gesso onto each of the dimensional flowers and then onto the butterflies as well. This just gives them a little bit of a highlight and makes them, I think, a little bit more interesting looking. When I add the white gesso to flowers, I like to just dab it on a little bit, and I usually put the color or the white gesso just around the edges of the petals. I think that's the most natural looking place to put the highlights. I also add a few highlights, not a lot, but just a little touch of them to the larger butterflies and then to that really small butterfly that's at the top of the layout. I want to make sure that whatever I do to one butterfly, I do to the rest of the butterflies on the page. I found that the bottom right-hand corner of the layout looked a little bit empty, so I decided to use 2 more of the sentiments that were on the branding strip that I got the sentiment good times from. One of them says remember this and one of them says happiness, so I cut those out, and then once again I mounted them on some small pieces of pink paper, and then I inked the edges of those sentiments with the black soot distress oxide. I just wanted everything on the layout to have the inking on the edges. I just think that it makes it all come together and then nothing stands out as looking too different. I added a small butterfly to the bottom cluster, and I'm popping up its wings on some foam as well. I wanted to make sure that this didn't get to be a really large cluster, but I did want to have a butterfly on it since that's the element that's common to all of the other clusters and areas on the layout. I wanted to add some leaves to the flowers, but of course I can't use green because this is a monochromatic pink layout, so I decided to add some white die cut flowers. I used a die that was in my stash from Pink Fresh Studios. And although I considered the idea of adding some of the leaves to the title and to the sentiment cluster at the bottom and even to the larger butterflies, I decided that I was just going to put them surrounding the dimensional flowers that are around the photo. So I cut these die cuts down a little bit using just pieces of them, and then I tucked those pieces into a few different areas in the photo cluster. Now I'm adding some half pearls that are self-adhesive to the layout. I added some relatively larger pearls on the 2 photo corners. Then I add some 3mm pearls, the smallest ones, to the smallest butterflies. And there's a butterfly up at the title, there's one on the lower flower cluster, and there's also a small butterfly down at the bottom along with those sentiments. And I really like to use my scissors to help me position those pearls because otherwise I tend to drop them. I used some medium-sized pearls on that medium-sized butterfly on the top flower cluster. And then I went back to each of the smaller butterflies. I had only added 2 pearls to each of them. I decided to add a 3rd pearl. I just thought that it looked more complete with 3 pearls. Using some gel glue, I attached the die cut leaves to the layout. I just put a touch of glue at the base of each of the die cuts, and that's more than enough to hold them down to the layout. And then I was thinking that would be the last touch on the layout, but then I decided I wanted to add just a couple of pearls to those 3 sentiments on the page. So I used the medium-sized pearl and I added one on each side of all 3 of the sentiments, and that was the last touch that I added to the layout, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video and for sticking with me till the very end. I know this was a longer video. In the description box, you'll find links to the videos of all of the other scrapbookers who are taking part in the Rainbow Magic Hop this month. I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody's pink layouts. And this is also an Instagram hop too, so you'll find the links to the Instagram accounts as well. Thank you so much to Cassandra Tooth for putting all of this together. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.